My name is Oriana Ides. As I said, I'm a TA specialist with MHTTC Region 9. In addition to that, I also am a community-based therapist and have about 20 years experience in education in various roles. I'm also a mother, a daughter, a sister, a partner, and deeply love and am committed to my community. And this idea of liberation that I believe is possible. So that's just a bit about me. And I hand it over to Falila to introduce herself, and would love to see you introduce yourselves in the chat. I want to start by acknowledging that today's offering is presented by the Mental Health Technology and Transfer Center, MHTTC network. So grateful for our funding and support through SAMHSA. We have three main objectives for this offering, right? It's really to understand healing-centered engagement and to explore or build upon our existing understanding of trauma-informed care that many of us are currently uplifting in our day-to-day work, and how my understanding the context, the lived experience, the assets, the cultural strengths and ancestral wisdom of our young folks, of our clients, really strengthen our ability to serve and support and create healing. So that's our first objective. Other is to explore the tensions in how we might turn this theory into practice, right? What within our organizational structures, our existing defaults and ways of being might make it difficult for us to center healing-centered engagement. We want to be in conversation and dialogue around that so that we can problem solve together and find new ways of being. And then not lastly, but also we really value lived experience and want to shift the paradigm that creates a small caveat for lived experience, right? Or a certain position or place for it. We really want to bring that into the center of this. And so our lived experience, yours, absolutely, there's wisdom in it, and it is a place we want to start from. So as I said, this is the second in a series of 4. Today is challenging all forms of oppression in healing work. Next session, we're really excited to uplift culturally sustaining practices, specifically in substance use recovery and prevention. And then throughout, we're honoring lived experience, but really uplifting the ways that supports healing-centered approaches.
So just quickly before we start, and very, very important, we'd like to acknowledge the land that we're on. Currently, I'm actually in Oakland, California, but I live in a land called Mount Shasta, which is home to the Karuk Native folks and the Winnemay-Wintu. But this area of land that we are on in Oakland we know historically was land of the Ohlone people. And so we invite you to acknowledge that the land that we share in North America and some of the other places that we are in had people on the land before it was colonized and before Westerners came to live in that land. We invite you to learn about the people of the land that you are on and to acknowledge that not only were there broken treaties, not only was there historical genocide and oppression, but
She also is inviting us to acknowledge the labor, the unseen emotional labor, the physical labor of folks who are often unacknowledged, who are often used beyond their capacity, that are viewed as expendable. We acknowledge that the cultural, economic growth, and the physical development of this country throughout history and across time has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants who suffered the horrors of transatlantic trafficking, enslavement, Jim Crow, and dysfunction of our current social system, right? This is not a past labor acknowledgement. This is still very much present day. We are indebted to the labor and sacrifice and must acknowledge the residuals of violence and trauma throughout the generations and the impact that can still be felt and witnessed today. In this labor acknowledgement, I also would love to invite in an appreciation, a deep bow of gratitude for those coming to this land in search of creating stability and safety for their families and their people who are often living in conditions in other countries that were created by our country here.
Let's think a little bit about healing. Healing is explicitly political. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, and we'll share with you some of the political context that our wellness and our self care and our individual and collective healing has for this world. But before we get into that, I just wanted to acknowledge that most of us are advocates and practitioners of both trauma informed care and healing centered engagement. With that being noted, it's important that we are constantly checking in, that we are constantly reflecting, going inward, that we're constantly shifting so that we can center healing and wellness as the focal point of our work. So it's important to talk about our system, this system that we're in, these climates and these cultures that we are working within, because they impact our ability to actually connect to our healing. So,
Yes.
healing centered engagement is a non clinical, strength based approach that advances a holistic view of healing. It centers culture and identity, right, as a central feature in well being. And this is a quote by a dear friend of mine and a teacher of mine, Dr. Sean Jen Wright. And when he talks about healing centered engagement, his lens and frame is really comes from working with young people, doing youth development. What does it mean for us to center healing for young people, right? How does that look within the educational systems and structures that exist within our society? But this approach, this healing centered strategy, is something that can be applied in multiple settings. I'm a drama therapist by trade. And so, as a therapist, my main goal should be therapy and wellness and healing. But you know, if you work within a mental health field, that that's not always the case. Sometimes, as a therapist, you're doing case management stuff, right? But we need you to understand that this idea, this theory is really about what are the strengths of the individual and how do we center who they are and what is their culture as a place of empowerment and healing and wholeness for them. So, we're going to just go a little deeper into healing centered, wanting to think about it being political rather than clinical, right? And as we expand on the idea of trauma informed, one of the elements of trauma informed that I love, one of the basic principles of trauma informed is to do no additional harm. When you are healing centered, your goal is to do no additional harm. And that may mean that all of the wonderful interventions and strategies that you have in place, you may not get to them. But what you can do is create an environment that is not causing additional harm. A lot of times, as service providers, we add to the harm and the burdens and the pain of the folks we are actually intentionally trying to serve. So, one, healing centered, as I said previously, it is explicitly political. Two, it is culturally grounded and views healing as the restoration of identity. Three, it's based in assets and focuses on well being we want rather than the symptoms we want to suppress. Four, it is supportive of providers in their own healing. Ding, 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 ding. Four, it is supportive of you in your own healing. And then five, healing centered asks the question of who are you, what is right with you, and what is right with your community. We know the things that we focus on are the things that we activate. So Healing Center says, let's focus on the healing, right? Let's acknowledge what is happening that is positive. And y'all, this can be really hard, really, really hard. And so we are not weak for our inability to not be able to necessarily protect and activate our own healing individually. The question is, how can you begin to center your healing? Just you showing up for this call is a sign that you are thinking about being healing centered if you're not already practicing it. So let's continue to learn.
Um, so beautiful. Like one of the first pillars is understanding that our healing is absolutely political, right? Our access to conditions, our access to practices and tools that support healing, and our experience with stressors absolutely is dependent on our identity, on our location, on our social systems and the ways in which they see our humanity, they support and serve us, or they don't. Right. And so we want to introduce, many of you are already familiar with this, but I think it's important to remind ourselves, right? Oftentimes when you think about the medical model, when you think about Western notions of healing, we put so much of the emphasis on the individual and a lot of the emphasis on individual behavior. And what healing centered engagement begs us to do is broaden our gaze and to think about the individual as in constant relation with different systems, and that those systems, their access to conditions, basic needs, their quality of conditions and basic needs absolutely directly correlates to their quality of their life, the health of their relationships, and their ability to engage in healing, right? And so I just want to invite folks as you're looking at this um, diagram here that illustrates the social determinants of health, what are you seeing? So this is an invitation to share in the chat or even unmute. Like with your eyes, what are you seeing here? And what does this bring up for you? What wondering, what feelings, what experiences or memories, what other texts or training have you engaged in, right? That is coming up for you as you look at this diagram. I love it. So, community, right? Really seeing community as integral to our individual wellness, right? The interconnectedness of each other, of the systems experiences.
Oriana, I'll just say quickly, I wonder about how Black and brown women, Black and Native women um, tend to show up as the healing for the world, but also have some of the highest statistical um, negative social conditions. For instance, Native and Black women
Mhm,
have the highest level of poverty within the United States. However, 80% of our household depends on our income,
mhm,
right? So this idea of we're paid the lowest. However, everyone is our children and most of our families are reliant on that little bit of money we make and
mhm.
that we make do and we make magic. So I noticed that and I wonder about that.
We want to share a clip here of a film called, it's actually a series of films called Unnatural Causes. So it was produced by PBS, and if you're not familiar, maybe a reaction in the if you're familiar with this series. It's about I don't know, 12 or 13 years old. It's absolutely incredible, but it uplifts social determinants of health in really understandable, complex ways, um, that helps us see the direct correlation between the sense of control we have in our life, we do or don't, and our health, right? So often thought of as the biopsychosocial connections. So we're gonna play a 4 minute clip of 4 minutes and 31 seconds, where a number of scientists are illustrating the power of social determinants of health and our access to healing and wellness.
There's one view of us as biological creatures that we are determined by our genes, that what we see in our biology is somehow innately us because of who we were born to be. What that misses is that we grow up and develop. We grow up as children, we grow up as adults and continue. We interact constantly with the world in which we are engaged. That's the way in which our biology actually happens. We carry our history in our bodies. How could we not?
Living in America should be a ticket to good health. We have the highest gross national product in the world.
I'm very happy to finally have some of my cars in one location, some of them.
We spend $2 trillion per year on medical care. That's nearly half of all the health dollars spent in the world. But we've seen our statistics. We live shorter, often sicker lives than in any other industrialized country. We rank 30th in life expectancy.
Especially of economically developed countries, we are at the bottom of the list.
A higher percentage of our babies die in their first year of life than in Malta, Slovenia, Cyprus. How can this be? Is this just because 47 million of us have no health insurance?
Healthcare can deal with the diseases and illnesses, but a lack of healthcare is not the cause of illness and disease. It is like saying, since aspirin cures a fever, that the lack of aspirin must be the cause of the fever.
Or is it mostly because of our American diet and personal health behaviors?
Those behaviors themselves, in part, determined by economic status. And so our ability to avoid smoking and eat a healthy diet depends, in turn, on our access to income, education, and what we call the social determinants of health.
But wouldn't our genes trump social determinants of health?
Among twins who lived together until age 18, who basically grew up in the same households, so had at least a relatively similar exposure, if they diverged later in life, if one became professional and the other was working class, they ended up with different health status as adults. This is among identical twins.
Written into our bodies is a lifetime of experience, shaped by social conditions and policies that can determine who will be sicker, who will die sooner.
There are ways in which our society is organized that are bad for our health. And there's no doubt that we could reconfigure ourselves in ways that would benefit our health.
There are huge inequalities in the society. All this wealth is maldistributed.
Pet food, ice for the pets' water.
And I think that's in part why the US as a whole has relatively poor health amongst the rich countries, and why even the better off people are suffering. And we think that that is not inevitable.
So let's can we move forward, Oriana? Because we really also want to reflect on the systems, y'all. And so we're going to talk about this next piece, how we look at the oppressor. I'm going to pass it back to you, Oriana, to set the frame, and then I'd like to share some personal experiences.
Yeah, slides are getting a little funky, but before kind of spending some time examining internalized depression or the sub-oppressor, we want to kind of bring attention to these four eyes of oppression. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but we want to acknowledge that 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 oppression is absolutely structural and systemic, and it seeps into our every fiber. It's unavoidable. Even as hard as we make effort to interrupt and challenge, it is a constant process of unlearning, of decolonizing, of looking back and forging new ways. So we just want to, pay kind of a special attention to the ways in which oppression can be, as I said, structural, institutional, interpersonal, and also individual. Right. And we're going to spend some time thinking about these realms of um, of oppression, and invite in the chat for you all to share how you understand oppression and how you understand these four eyes of oppression.
And as we talk about this, we're really thinking about what interrupts our healing. Because remember, we're here to talk about healing-centered engagement. So, what are the things that interrupt our healing? And we know that the four eyes of oppression is something that is interrupting how we do healing on an individual base, interpersonally with one another, within our institutions that we work in and that we establish, and then also within the system, which is something that includes history and institutions. So this piece is really important, understanding the four oppressions and how they show up.
So we want to uplift a bit of liberation psychology and of Paulo Freire's work here in understanding oppression. Many of us already can speak to the ways in which the systems in dominant society, institutions, are oppressive, right? And create the experience of inequity and inequality. But Paulo Freire said that they discover that without freedom, they cannot exist authentically, right? That there is this deep need, right? Calling and yearning for freedom. Yet, although they desire authentic existence, there's a fear of it. Right. And this consciousness, this fear of freedom and of challenging oppression in all of its forms can absolutely be unconscious. And so we wanted to spend some time thinking about the unconscious ways in which we enact oppression, right, upon ourselves, in our relationships, and within our organizations, within the services that we provide. So Paulo Freire looked at oppression through this pyramid here. This is one of the ways in which he through popular education taught about liberation. And he said that, there's the oppressor at the top and the oppressed at the bottom, but that dynamic could not exist without a buffer. And so within the middle between the oppressor and the oppressed are sub-oppressors, are folks that look like and often live like the oppressed. They are the oppressed, but they carry out the will of the oppressor. They take on the consciousness of the oppressor, right? And so this could be the way in which we adhere to like Western standards of beauty or notions of success, right? This could be the ways in which we expect our clients to show up. This is respectability politics, right? And so this idea of sub-oppressors can, through this process of prescription, right, that's it's existing within a society, and then what he says is adhesion, that we grow to take on the will of the oppressor, the ways of, the beliefs of, the relationships and dynamics of the oppressor subconsciously without even knowing it often. And then Frantz Fanon says that he introduces this idea of his horizontal violence, which very much connects to this pyramid here, and that rather than resisting oppression and the oppressive forces, we often can fight ourselves and we fight one another, and we see one another as the threat. Right. And so these, I think, are painful dynamics to like pose some inquiry into. And I noticed my own resistance when being invited into inquiry around it. But I think there is a lot of growth and healing that can exist when we do so. So I'm going to hand it over to Falila to share a bit more. And then we're going to invite more conversation and a collective journal.
So I'm going to peel back a layer of the onion. I like to call it in my healing work. We talk about women being like onions. We have layers, right? So I've done a lot of work for a long time around gender-based violence. I've done it locally and nationally. It's something that I feel very close to in a variety of ways. My lived experience, just philosophically, as well as just the tremendous lifetime impact that sexual assault can have on an individual and on a community. And I've always saw myself as part of the oppressed group within that. However, at the same time, I'm someone that believes in sexual liberation and freedom, right? And so I want to share a story with you about something that happened to me. And again, asking folks to keep this confidentially. You're welcome to share the point of this story with others without sharing my name. That's awesome. So, when I was a young teenager, about 14 years old, I was being molested by a grown man who was 25 years old. And in my 14-year-old's body and mind, my lived experience, I didn't think that he was molesting me. I didn't believe that he was abusing me. I thought that I could get older men, and I thought that I was fast, which is a term that's used largely in urban Black communities. Well, that girl is fast, right? It's usually the child that is blamed for the adult feeling sexual feelings towards him or her or they. And so I was definitely influenced by that cultural norm. So I thought I was fast, and then I just could attract these older guys. And in that, I had friends who were 12 years old, 12 and 13. And I used to encourage them to go into the room with him and to engage in sexual activities with him, right? And these are close friends that I'm still friends with to this day. I recently, in my process of understanding it, when I became the age 25 that this young man was when he was molesting me, I was looking at little boys who were 14, and I realized, like, how did you make that connection regarding this large societal issue? Why did you think that you were like attracting him? There's nothing these 14-year-old boys can do to be attractive to you in a sexual manner because you see them as children. So that was first, that I had this awareness just about myself and what was not happening. Secondly, my friend who was 12 years old shared with me that she felt that I was kind of like a predator because even though we were both young, I was influencing her to engage with this grown man and to engage in these sexual activities. And it was profound for me in my awareness of self to think about myself as someone that was more of the oppressor, the predator, than the oppressed, just a young girl who was being molested. I share this story because a lot of times we forget that some of us are playing the role of the sub-oppressor, that some of us are actually activating from that place, whether it's in our service provision, whether it's in our parenting, whether it's in the way we judge others, right? That we ourselves can be acting out the will of the oppressor in our behavior. And so I share that with you, and I hope that story is helpful for you to think about how you might be acting as the oppressor, how you may have internalized some of those elements, and how that may show up in your life, and what type of healing and cleanup can you do for yourself around that and for the people that you are connected with.
First, think what surfaces for you when you think about the pyramid. right? Where do you maybe experience resistance? Where might a memory come up? What connection can you make to it? And then where do you see yourself in the pyramid? Um, and then the next question, which might require a bit of like internal resource, is what ways might you be carrying out the will of the oppressor? And you think about um, the way you provide service. You think about who you are within your family. You think about how you relate to other people. Where might you be either thinking or acting in ways that serve the oppressor or oppression? Further reinforce it.
As you're thinking about centering healing, so if we could go to slide 30, which just looks at the realms of healing, that would be amazing because it looks at, just like we looked at the four eyes of oppression, we can also think about that in relation to the realms of healing. So, what is the history, legacy, and structure of healing? What did your great grandmamas do and your great grandfathers do? You thought he was just fishing to feed folks. He was fishing getting his mental health, right? Like you thought she was just making this food because she had to make it. No, grandma was making that food to heal your body. She was putting that onion on the bottom of your foot and rubbing your back because she knew about its scientific properties, right? So I want you to think about the history and the legacy, your families. What are the systems and institutions that are starting to incorporate healing as part of how they move? The organization I work for, BOP, we only work a 4-day work week. And when my executive director made that shift, folks thought she was crazy. Black organizing, police free schools, building Black sanctuary in Oakland. What you mean we only work 4 days a week? Yep, we take Fridays off. And y'all, I'm gonna tell you, some weeks it feels like, can we work a 3-day work week and have 4 days off, right? But this idea that there's impact and power you have, what does it mean for you individually? What are some of the realms of healing for you as an individual? What can you create for the people you serve, the students you serve, the folks struggling with addiction that you serve, the folks struggling with mental health? What can you put in place from where you're sitting right now that helps to activate this focus on healing? Those small practices are very, very important as we're having these larger conversations about the theory of it, understanding the history of it, and how we go forward. So please, I just wanted to share this slide with you because I think it's very, very, very important. We are impacted by oppression, but we are liberators and we are healers and we are moving from that place as well.
Right. And so within these realms of healing, we are looking at the deep connectedness, the wisdom, and the way that we have to offer one another, the systems and the structures that can absolutely be reconstructed, right? And reconfigured differently, right? The idea of 5 work a day work week, right? How liberating is it to reconfigure what
Right.
a work week could be for us in a way that centers our healing? Um, so we want to introduce that in juxtaposition to the 4 eyes of oppression, right? Because there are these realms of harm. Absolutely, they are strong forces in our life, and there are also these realms of healing that oppression serves to disconnect us from. And so we want to maybe in closing uplift the powerful words and perspective of Audre Lorde. Many of us are familiar with the bottom part of this quote, but reading it in a fuller context is so important. And I'll just say one brief thing and then hand it over to Falila. Radical self-love, right? Oftentimes we think about self-care as very individual, and it just kind of gives us a moment of reprieve, a moment of breath. Right. And what Audre Lorde said is actually self-care is not self-care unless it is also giving us the energy and the resource to challenge the oppression, the forces and the systems, the structures that cause our disease, that cause our need for self-care. So I'm gonna hand it to Falila And then we'll close with a little practice.
There is historical and cultural significance on this idea of centering self and how the centering of self affects all. There's a principle in West Africa called Ubuntu that says, I am because we are. The Rastafarian culture, they theoretically believe in I and I. So it's about I, the individual, and the big I, the we, right? And I know that this is true in all other cultures, that there's this idea that you centering yourself is actually powerful to help all. It's not necessarily self, like in American culture, it's all about me. I'm going to consume and consume. It's more like the I is a part of a we. So I just want to lift that up in closing and remind you that as you confront these systems of oppression, spend as much time, if not more time, on thinking about and activating your healing, your own personal liberation, and your own personal self-care, that you are worthy and that you are important, and it does have a ripple impact.
Invite a closing practice that that might support us in integrating that idea in a more fuller way. So some of us are sitting with clarity and awakenedness, tranquility. So much of this world wants to disconnect us from that, but we have that in this moment. We have it in our minds, we have it in our hearts, we have it in our bodies. And invite a collective breath in, and as you're breathing, invite that word to settle into your cells, your blood cells, your muscle, your fascia, your joints, your bones. That word of gratitude, of understanding, of tranquility. Give it some space, give it some time and attention. Breathe it in, allow it to settle, to dance within you, to play, to rest. Upon your next exhale, I invite you to breathe out anything that is counter to that. Breathe that energy out your mouth, maybe even make a sound if you can. Breathing in gratitude, tranquility, understanding. Breathing out anything counter to it. Wiggle your hands, wiggle your toes. If your eyes are closed or your gaze is lowered, I invite you to raise your gaze and look around your room. Any signs of color, of light, of life. Back to the screen. We so thank you for your energy, for your words, for your trust, for your presence. We're really grateful for the time that we had together, and we look forward to seeing you